My tool of choice was the Pinhole camera. That became my direction of my work for a very long time. For really about 3 to 4 years, it was all pinhole work in China, Korea, and Vietnam. And so the work that I'm looking at showing with that portfolio is a series of street portraits, street culture, minority culture. When I began teaching at Green Hills School, everyone kept saying, you need to meet Warren, you need to meet Warren, you need to meet Warren. And Warren is Warren Frericks, a good friend of mine. He was the Chinese instructor at Green Hills School, and he had been taking students to China for several years at that point. And people kept looking at us like this would be a very natural progression and a very natural collaboration. I had at that point had traveled to Vietnam solo for the first time, and that was my first trip to Asia, and had worked exclusively in pinhole work. When we decided to collaborate and start taking students to China and Korea, we wanted to go off the grid. We wanted to do things in a very cultural way, get down below the surface, work with locals, use language skills, interview people, photograph people. Me and the students and a couple of the other adults took a bus and went way up north into the inner Mongolian grasslands. So we're right by the Russian border. We're pretty far away from civilization. We had planned to do a series of overnight stays in yurts and in a yurt village. The local officials found out about us and our plans and diverted us to a Disneyland of the yurts, so to speak. So we made the best out of that and photographed what we at the time were calling manufactured culture. You know, culture that didn't really exist in a natural way, but was manufactured to give us a sense of the history and the culture itself. The next day we traveled back, and my good friend Nusrat, who is now a Chinese instructor at Green Hills School, said that she knew of a traditional yurt village. We decided to pull over, do a little hike over some of the grasslands, and we actually became, in a serendipitous moment, we were invited to participate in a depossession ritual. And so we spent the rest of the day watching a shaman pray, transition into his chants and into his method of prayer, and work at depossessing a local villager. That was one of those moments that really you can't recreate. And the image itself is the moment of when the shaman is putting on a robe of serpents and shells and all of these symbols of sky and the earth and land and elements of the earth. The tree is there and he is about to go into his trance, and standing just a few feet away and watching him going into a trance was something that I will never forget. I wanted to deal with the environment, show what is surprising about the environment, show what it is like to live in China and Korea. And so that's, again, dealing with cultural studies and bringing what I learned there and coming back to the United States and photographing carnies at State Fair of Texas, photographing people and street culture here in the United States as well. So I had gotten a little farther out of town, and I wanted to just keep walking and walking, just keep going out of this one avenue and just to follow it through to see where it went. I found these two gentlemen outside of their mosque. I was actually photographing a mosque, And these two gentlemen wanted to be photographed in front of the mosque, and so I photographed them and gave them a card. You know, they could email me. There was my website, all my contact information. The gentleman, one of the two gentlemen, had a bicycle cart. You know, so it's one of those carts that you've got the bicycles with the big card, big flat bed kind of thing in the back, and he insisted on giving me a ride. Well, he was going the wrong way, and he insisted that I get in the back and he was going to give me a ride. Well, he assumed that I wanted to go back to town. And I didn't want to go back to town, but how could I refuse, right? You don't. Sometimes you have to know when to just accept what's going to happen next. And whether it's what you intended or not, you have to allow serendipity to play a process in the experience. And so sitting in the back of the bicycle cart, I had my camera still attached to my tripod, and I always try to walk around with that attached at the end. I just kind of looked at it and thought, wow, this could be a really interesting image because we're going in a straight line. And so I opened my shutter, and there was a gentleman pedaling. The road is passing through in the lower left-hand side, and the series of dots on the top left, or the top middle of the image, is the sun. And that is just kind of trying to capture the image. The sun is just burning itself in such a beautiful way within the exposure. So this was about a 5 to 8 second exposure, and it was one of those things that quickly became one of my favorite photographs of the trip. So. I wanted to make a physical object, photographing with an iPhone and then just going straight back to a print, it didn't quite have any kind of immediacy to me. It didn't speak to me yet. And I had done some of that, and I had utilized a camera in that direction, but it just still didn't quite feel real enough for me. And I like dealing with objects. I like dealing with the physical sense of creating a final image. It all begins with just an iPhone image. Starting off, I could either use Pro Camera, which is one of my main cameras. I also use just the good old native camera because it's easy and it's fast. I might do a little bit of post-production in Snapseed. That's a very good, wonderful start of just doing some basic retouching, especially if I'm traveling. I'll do a little bit of work like that starting off. Then I run that through Photoshop. Start looking at if I need to do any burning or dodging, which they all need burning and dodging. Using Nik software for my translation into black and white, and so start to get away from the color information and then start looking into how is that going to translate within a wet plate image. Place that into my Dropbox account, open that on my iPad, and then from there is the translation into the tintype or ambrotype process. There's always seems to be an underground of people that want to communicate, you know, and just small things, symbols, shapes, taglines, and I just was always attracted to photographing those things, just because I found that they were kind of fun, you know, and it really kind of looked back into the idea of cave art, you know, that looking into motion and how motion was interpreted on the caves in France, you know, with just multiple legs and painted over and over and over again, looking at man's need to create and leave an impression of art. It was always about finding things that are undiscovered or in a very subtle place that somebody may not have found that symbol yet or that interpretation. And so I became fascinated with finding out more about graffiti artists, finding special symbols and shapes, and trying to find their meaning. I didn't realize Andre the Giant was such a big hit, you know, as far as a slap tag, and having recently found, you know, I mean, obviously, you know, that's one of those things that, you know, if you know about it, then you're familiar with it, and then you see it everywhere, you know. The image that I call Zoetrope, an original iPhone movie, was photographed in Munich, Germany. A good friend of mine invited me out for an intensive beer research trip in Europe a couple of summers ago, and I found a zoetrope, you know, one of those little things that you just kind of spin around and you see the motion and all that. I took an iPhone movie of the image, just, you know, like a 10-15 second exposure of that. I don't know why, I just thought it was kind of fun. And one night when I was working on my exhibit of slap tags and cultural graffiti type things, I kind of kept coming back to that movie. I thought, well, how could I use this within the photograph? Decided to play it many times on my screen, and I pulled out my iPhone and started using my slow shutter app. And it's a wonderful app that gives the appearance of time and accumulation of time. It's almost like using a very slow shutter speed. And you can move the sliders back and forth and choose a sharper image or something that's a little more mundane. And so I photographed that multiple times. Came up with these raw images in Photoshop, opened them up, started retouching, started recropping, and then decided to do my own little version of a MyBridge image. You know, so I stacked 3 separate images, each one is distinct, and made a single document, put it back on my iPad, and created a photograph that many people mistakenly think is just a direct photograph of a MyBridge image, but it's actually originally all mine. So it's actually kind of a fun interpretation of that, and a collaboration of technology, of multiple pieces of technology. So I don't think there's ever been a time that, like there is now, that there's just such an explosion of information, an explosion of technology, and just having the ability to do something, you know, and we're freed from having to be truthful, you know, where, you know, digital has really kind of freed us from being able to have to do that, you know. Now we're able to really explore in personal ways that I think photography was always looked at as a recording science until the last 20, 30 years. And now we're able to be artists just like anybody else.